Thank you, Mary. Distinguished speakers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I guess all protocols observed. So I'm preaching to the converted. I'm going to keep my comments fairly short. In the next few minutes, I'm going to highlight what I think are some of the key challenges in implementation of legal aid and legal assistance systems across the world, and provide a non-exhaustive list of good practices from across the continent. Unlike most of you in this room, I do not have specific experience in legal aid or access to justice. I'm actually an anti-corruption person. I don't like the word specialist. It maybe conveys more than it should. But coming from a different discipline, as I'm working in many countries, I've very often seen people, both adults and children, being held in detention for very lengthy periods without ever going anywhere near a trial. And from my corruption angle, you hear stories of people being asked for bribes for the most basic of things, for water, for food, etc. This creates also a corruption industry. Now, one of the issues here is that, just from my side, from my corruption side, an effective legal aid system may well prevent these folk from being put in such an awful situation, and may well reduce opportunities for corruption and the corruption that seeps through so many prison services in the world. During the negotiations on the principles and guidelines, legal aid came within an absolute hair's breadth. I think 2 countries vetoed it, of being declared a fundamental principle which should exist in all legal systems. Now, with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, are custodians of a wide range of criminal justice and drug conventions and treaties. Anything that is declared as a fundamental principle in a legal system is a very important area indeed, and to come close to it highlights its importance. Now, it's an area where there are obviously multiple challenges in implementation. Thankfully, in negotiating these guidelines and principles, the world, all of you, I'm sure many of you were involved somewhere along the line, you've come close to overcoming the first challenge in implementing a system. In that, really, if you read the principles, the guidelines, the handbook, they define the core elements of any legal aid or legal assistance system. But I'm now going to throw out what I see as main challenges. And these are things I think you need to debate in the week. You may differ with me. I'm very happy for you to differ with me. I hoped I'd be here for questions, but I'm going to have to run very quickly afterwards. And the first, which was clearly mentioned, in fact the second was touched on earlier this morning as well, is in terms of resources. And by resources I mean both financial and human. My experience in working in other areas is the vast majority of governments I've come across are extremely resource constrained. Their budgets are limited. There is a constant struggle to get money for your particular area. The focus, and I believe rightfully so, for most countries, is on providing basic services to the citizenry. Now, you start thinking about the justice system. The case for prosecution services, police judiciaries, is relatively clear from the security angle. But even then, I mean, how many police forces, how many prosecution services, how many judiciaries have you come across that say that they are well funded and have sufficient money to actually exercise their own mandate? The case in respect of legal aid and legal assistance is more difficult. Many people will see it as spending money to protect people they view as criminals. So it's a much trickier case to make. It's much harder to make the budget, the story, to actually get the budget to fund a system. And without that funding, your system is not going to work. I'm hoping that as the discussions go on in the week, you will hear sort of more examples from those who've got much more expertise of me as to how the case has been made, how that in fact by adapting legal aid systems, there are other cost systems within the criminal justice system. I mean, I can only imagine if someone isn't detained unnecessarily for 10 years, there must be a pretty substantial saving there. Across the world, we see these long-term detentions, so there must be saving there. And this was highlighted in the speech immediately before the break, getting the money is only part of the story. You know, you need, for systems to be fair and equitable, the skill of the lawyers and paralegals on either side of the table needs to be fairly equal. I think back to my days in private practice. I worked for a large firm. Now, one of the techniques that we used was to simply bombard the opposition with experts, with numbers of lawyers at the table, and come from a position of strength. Now, very often an opposition will simply bow. The number of applications they have to work on, the amount of documentation they need to go through is killing. So when there needs to be a way for a long-term sustainable legal aid system to actually attract and retain skilled lawyers and other legal professionals, those that at least match the skills of the prosecution service. Interesting? Okay, but I promise that wasn't me. Okay. And the guy just said 5 minutes, probably him. Due warning. The second challenge is very much one of a wide variety of audiences actually understanding the importance of the subject. You would hear a group of experts who work on this subject, but if you think to the law enforcement officials in your countries, you think to the general public in your countries, how well do they actually understand legal aid, legal assistance? It's difficult. You think about, you know, any of you think about your police. I mean, some of what they do anyway is engaged in the principles. Anyone who's watched a US crime show will hear people being surrounded, you know, and they will hear them being told they're entitled to representation. But how many countries is that actually happening? How do you know it's happening? So there's an educational challenge, which is again recognized the principles and guidelines. But when it comes to the public, and here I unashamedly look to where I know, which is this continent. In many countries, there are traditional dispute resolution systems. Many citizens of those countries do not believe that the formal justice system is for them unless it is there to persecute them and take away rights from them. That is a fundamental belief of many, many people. Even in countries like we're standing in, where you've got a functioning, strong court legal system, you don't have to go too far from this room to find people who would run from the formal justice system and look more towards the traditional system. You need to find a way of educating the public, of really letting the public know that here is an opportunity, here's a system which, if followed, and if your government follows, actually makes the court system something other than a preserve of the lawyers and the wealthy. Makes it something that can actually work for the people. And that is very important to get across. If you can't do that, in a lot of countries the citizens will avoid. My last 2 minutes, and thank you for the nice orange sign, I've got to say, I'm just going to sort of say, you know, it's not all bad news. As we look across this continent, for those of you from the other continents and those of you whose initiatives I'm not going to mention because I simply haven't got time, forgive me. If we look north of our borders to Zimbabwe, we see the Care at the Core of Humanity project, which is basically reacting to the problem of children not being represented. That is leading to children actually getting represented in court. If we look for university legal aid clinics, something that's clearly mentioned. We can see them in a broad range of countries. Maybe not exclusive, but Ethiopia, Kenya, Mozambique, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, South Africa. In Uganda, we find legal aid service provider networks and a legal aid basket fund. In Zambia, a victim support unit. I could continue. There are examples of work starting, but you all as a collective, you need to talk together, you need to put your thinking hats on, and you need to find a collective way of moving an area that is close to your heart, central to a lot of the work you do, up the international agenda, so that you get funding. You've got the principles, you've got the guidelines, you've got the handbook, you've got the basic structure, but in implementation, you need funding, you need structured professionals, and you need public buy-in. Those are things I see as absolutely fundamental challenges you need to address. I hope during the course of this week, you will have a chance to really talk through some of these issues and come forward with at least some solutions. Thank you very much indeed for listening to me. I hope I made some sense to you.